And I'd like to start today's conversation by addressing, I know this as being part of the conversation series to begin, that the, the idea of this book series has been Ruggero's mind quite some time. So I think that this is an opportunity to kind of, for him to say a few words as to what has been the driving motivation behind the idea of this book series. So Ruggero, in what, in your view, ties together prophecy, transmission, days, the year next?
In studies on prophecy. Um, let's say studies in prophecy, but also an understanding of prophecy, um, which is more, let's say, wide and considers also the way prophecy has been considered for, by the Muslim community. So we all participated in a project, a research project, which is French-German collaboration on by PFP in the NR, the Prophet in the mirror of his community. And this topic as well, it was came with for Director of Reichsmut, also from this situation that there's somehow a gap if you consider the importance of Islam. If you consider that Islam is actually a prophetic religion, how is this reflected in academic research? And our observation, our experience was that it's not reflected sufficiently. You know, this very basic fact actually hasn't been considered and reflected in the various research fields, okay, that are concerned with Islam. So I think this was like the first impulse, because we had been starting working on actually on different topics, so on insanehood, on the notion of adab, on al-Kushairi and kalam. So, but then we turned to this topic of prophecy and of constitution, and we realized, and this was the second reason maybe, that there is somehow a fragmentation in academic research in Islam between these three research fields that are now in the title of this series. So prophecy, transmission, and spirituality. So we have people working on hadith, for example, or transmission and hadith, but in a very specific way. Of course, since the 70s, we have now the influence of Halfo studies. So we have, of course, different considerations, not only focus on the question of usefulness of hadith for the history of Islam, but also hadith as a cultural heritage, let's say. So you had this, but people on hadith, they form like their own universe, you know, which is disconnected from people, for example, working on tasawwuf. And we call it spirituality, not only Sufism, because Sufism, as you know, is actually a historical form of Islamic spirituality. So we wanted to allow a larger picture of how, let's say, the experience of the divine has been articulated in Islam, in Islamic history, in Islamic life, in Islamic thought, and what does it mean actually, Islamic spirituality? You know, there are still voices, let's say, that deny that there's something like a genuine Islamic spirituality. You know, and what does it look like if you consider that Islam is a prophetic tradition? So what would be that prophetic spirituality be then? Okay, and what is the Islamic specificity of this year's spirituality? And then we have transmission, okay, because as I said, people working on hadith, and then people working on prophecy, very few, and also certain perspectives. So nubuwat is a kalam topic, or is falsafa sometimes, okay? But if you consider, I would even say Muslim life and thought today, but also the history of Islam, these three research fields don't appear as disconnected. At the contrary, in order to understand hadith, you need to understand prophetology, prophecy. And you need to understand how hadiths are actually lived, by those for whom the hadith is the Prophet is speaking to me. And I think that this fragmentation created a distorted understanding somehow of these three research fields, but also of many other topics in Islam. And we thought it would be necessary to establish a platform for publication of studies who try to show the connection between these three, but also to who are interested in the topic of prophecy, Islam, the fact, the fundamental paradigmatic meaning of prophecy, for example. So maybe this for the moment, and then I think the other points I can develop.